to host Rohit Turkhud. He is an immigration lawyer based out of New Jersey with offices in different parts of the US and different countries too. I'll let him introduce himself, but before that, I just wanted to introduce the topic in general. We have students who are incoming freshmen at universities in the US, and these are international students, just to clarify. They have an I-20 from a US university, but as you know, consulates are closed due to the pandemic, and there are so many questions that are directed to me or even to PDSOs at respective schools, which not everyone has answers for. So I just thought of curating this session to get Rohit's expert views on this certain situation with the pandemic playing out. So welcome, Rohit. Why don't you start with introducing yourself, and then we'll jump straight into the questions.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for inviting me and having me on this show. And this is such a timely subject. And of course, you're the subject matter expert, which is the reason why you've got your audience there. So thank you again for inviting me. Thank you to all of the audience and the viewers and the listeners. I'm not quite sure which category perfectly fits in with the pandemic and Zoom, but I think it covers everybody. So I am originally from Bombay, born and raised over there. I can speak 3 languages, the most common ones obviously being Hindi, Gujarati, and Marathi. In addition to our English conversations, I have had the benefit and privilege of being in the US now for quite a few years. I am a partner at a law firm that actually focuses on immigration law. We represent businesses and IT companies. We have, like Arjun kindly said, we have offices, several offices in the US. In the Bay Area, I'm in New Jersey, as he said. We have our head office in Troy. We have offices in Denver and Miami, and a back office in Mumbai. So we're about 135 professionals, all focused on US immigration laws. So with that background, I am happy to help your field your questions and answer as many as I can. I have actually been coming to India for the last 5 years. I've been coming almost every single month. Until February of this year, because I have been focusing on EB5. Alphabet's a number that many of you may be familiar with. It's one of the ways of getting the green card through an investment opportunity. And that is a subject that we can also discuss if you wanted to, but students is the subject of the day. So Arjun, let's chat and let's help as many people as we can.
Yeah, so I think thanks. That's a great introduction, Rohit. The key thing was, students have worried, what is my status, or do I have a status? And it's, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And if there was no pandemic, if the world was normal, students would have got their I-20s. They would start the process. But suddenly they have so many questions. So they reach out to the PDSO, the signatory authority, person who's signed this form. So, what is the role of a PDSO? And how can they help in the current situation?
So, Arjun, you are certainly very, very important to every one of your listeners. I'm the guest. The most important person right now, I'm going to say, is the DSO. Because the DSO is the one who's going to be able to guide you as best possible, because they control the service records, they control your I-20, they're the ones who are looking at all the rules and regulations, especially because most of your kids would be going to very, very well-established and good schools. And the DSOs are certainly conversant with what is going on. Having said that, of course, there's no doubt that today's situation is so dynamic, so much in a state of flux, that the DSOs themselves cannot be faulted if they cannot offer you a perfect solution or perfect advice. Because what is true today may just not be true tomorrow, and what's true tomorrow may not be true the day you get onto the flight, and what's true when you get onto the flight may not be true when you land in a third country if you're not taking a direct flight. So all those concerns are clearly there. I think every student and every parent is entitled to be concerned and is entitled to make the decision on the best available information at the time they're making that decision. DSOs are important, clearly. DSO is the one who signs your I-20. DSO is the one who's going to issue you a new I-20 if you decide to defer your admission by a semester. They are the ones who sign off on the back to authorize your travel, to authorize your CPT, to authorize your OPT. So demigod, maybe. Okay, DSO. I think we can use that interchangeably. Some DSOs obviously are better than others. And to that extent, if there is a concern that the student has with the DSO, they can, I'm sure they're always welcome to reach out to you to confirm. They're certainly welcome to reach out to me to confirm information if they wanted to. So I think you begin with the DSO and then you take it from there. All the students who come to the US are extremely well educated. They are sophisticated, their parents are sophisticated, they're dealing with you. There's so much education and knowledge around that sometimes you just need to worry about the knowledge being incorrect, even if it's best intentioned.
That's great. The other kind of connected question we get all the time is it wise to appeal and defer by a term, or should we go with the flow and do online classes? What will it impact eventually in terms of the CPT and OPT and eventual work situations?
I think we've got to maybe separate it a little bit and make health the main issue, safety the main issue, and then worry about CPT and OPT. Of course, that answer would be colored by which year the kid is going to go back to study at. If he's a freshman, the parents' considerations and the students' considerations may be very different from somebody who's going to be a rising senior. Completely understand that. So if I were to separate it, I would say that as the parents consider the children's safety, as a parent myself, first of all, I'm going to say that your child is probably safer in the US with all its challenges than the child is in Delhi or in Mumbai right now. Not just physically, but I think also emotionally, psychologically, your child has, he's at that crescendo point where the US is where he or she is looking to go at the next step, right? Now, if they're unless you're living on a farm in Delhi or in a bungalow in Mumbai or some such fairly palatial home, your ability to go out and breathe the fresh air, I think, is a little limited by just the situation existing in India. In the US, if you're on campus, it's clearly bigger. It's going to allow the child to breathe a little more. Everybody over here is wearing a mask, as far as I can tell. Well, everybody was a wrong statement, considering the rising numbers in the US. But if you're coming in for the first time, I think, and you have the option to defer, you may want to consider it, and that's very much a personal choice. I think, again, if the colleges are giving you the option of online and in-room and in-person classes, you may want to try and mix and match that. Now, looking at that perspective, children who are considering that may, first of all, want to try and secure a housing on campus. Because from everything I'm hearing, and I'm sure, Arjun, you are far more of an expert on that, from everything I'm hearing, even housing is being offered in limited numbers because they want to socially distance the incoming class and the people living on campus. So when my kids went to college, they each started out with 2 people in a room. At this point, I don't know if it's going to be 2 people in a room or it's going to be only 1 person per room, which is immediately going to curtail the ability of the universities to offer adequate housing. So I think that's something one has to look at. If the parents feel my child is safer with me in Delhi or in Bombay, then I think you do want to consider exercising the option of deferment. Based on the memos that I've been seeing, clearly it's not going to be a challenge to defer your in-person attendance by 1 semester. So I think you've got to consider, where does that situation lie? If you're being offered inline and on-person classes, then obviously the decision is a little harder to make than if you're being offered only online classes. For those who are rising seniors, at this point, I don't think that your OPT is going to get affected if you decided to do your first semester abroad, so to say, which is what it would be, as long as you're taking the required number of courses. I think that the immigration policies will be relatively lax and will be relatively easier to deal with. They understand these situations right now. So again, depending on what you're being offered and what your own personal comfort level is, then look and say, okay, how much does this impact my OPT or does it not impact my OPT? It's going to be, according to me, impossible to expect a definitive answer, whether from the DSO or from me on that issue. Again, whether you're going to get a summer job or CPT is going to depend on the pandemic. It's going to depend on the health situation. It's going to depend on whether employers today who are all asking people to work remotely are going to want people to come into their offices to do a summer stint. I think there's just a lot of variables and not very clear answers. I'm sorry I gave you a very long-winded answer to a pretty
it's
quick
definitely, yeah, it's important to get the whole context, and there's obviously a need for these answers, and we all know that we are figuring things out as we go. But if we, like I said earlier, if you want to look back and say, if the pandemic did not exist, and that's where I think your role is also important to talk about, as to how can a student plan their sort of status and work towards, you know, after they graduate from college, work towards an H-1B or an O-1 visa, and how does the role of an immigration attorney come in place?
Sure. So you do not need an immigration attorney to get your first OPT, okay? Because you're getting your first OPT based on the fact that you've been a full-time student at the school, your DSO has signed off and authorized it, and you're applying for an employment authorization document so that you can work on your OPT. You do not need an immigration attorney for that. However, there are certain things that you do want to keep in mind, and I'm sure that, Arjun, you also guide them accordingly. Once the DSO authorizes the OPT, and this obviously applies for rising seniors who will be entitled to OPT, because OPT, different from CPT. OPT is optional practical training, which comes into play only after you graduate. CPT is curricular practical training, which has different considerations. So we are now talking only about OPT. You need the DSO signature. You must apply to the Immigration Service for your EAD, Employment Authorization Document, within 30 days of the DSO giving you the OPT permission or endorsing your I20 for purposes of OPT. You must apply within 30 days. If you do not apply within 30 days and you apply later, your EAD is going to get denied. You're not going to be able to get that. So you want to be very careful. There are clear timelines as to how much before you graduate you can apply and how much after you graduate you can apply for your OPT. Again, DSO comes into play, talk to the DSO. You do not need a job offer to get your first OPT. Now, for those of you who get OPT, avoid traveling to the extent possible until you get the employment authorization document in your hand. That would be my personal advice, considering all the variances and all the uncertainties associated with the immigration laws as they exist, with the implementation, with the treatment at the airports. I would avoid traveling. The EAD card takes anywhere from 90 to 100 days to receive after you apply. It is only after you have that card in your hand, not enough to get an approval notice which says your card is on its way. You have to get the physical actual card in your hand to start working for whoever the employer is who's offered you the OPT employment. Okay, so you want to be careful about that. So when you're planning, obviously the plan is to get a job like everybody else. I did that several decades ago. Everybody does exactly the same thing today. So hopefully you get a job offer. There are, I know, struggles at the present time because of the immigration environment, which has not been conducive necessarily to hiring foreign workers or foreign students. We hope that's going to change, but we'll have to wait and see. So you don't need a job offer. You want to apply within 30 days. You do not want to work without authorization. You were asking me about how does one maintain status. One of the best ways to maintain status is not to have unauthorized employment. And if you have employment, you got to file your taxes, you got to pay your taxes. Okay, you got to do all of that stuff. Trust me, the immigration has many different ways of figuring out whether you have worked without permission or not. So you do want to be careful about all of that. And my cardinal rule to all my clients, and even potential clients, or even people who came and chatted with me and didn't become clients, do not lie. When you're going to the consulate, do not lie. You have no reason to lie when you're applying for your F1. Your parents are spending approximately $250,000 or more on sending you there. You are going to a good university. No parent, and Arjun, is not sending you to a community college. So there should be no reason for you to lie about what you're going to study. And most of you come here to study STEM. Yes, I do have a couple of clients who go and study music, which is fantastic. But that's my cardinal rule. Do not lie. As long as you don't lie, you should have no reason to be afraid of any consular officer or any CBP officer, irrespective of the fact that they are in a position of authority. And I think, Arjun, you and I would both agree that even us, who have no reason to be afraid of anything or anybody, if you're stopped at a traffic light by a cop, you're always a little intimidated. And that second, for 1 second, the thought is, what did I do wrong? So I just prefer to walk the straight and narrow, stay on that honest path, and all your people, according to me, should be fine. That's the way I look at it.
Thanks, Rohit. This was a very informative session, and I know audiences can send in messages on our chat feature. So we'll be on standby for 10 minutes and take those questions. And